geocom.
Yes, Blake, I'm on. Can you hear me?
I can.
I had to unmute myself.
No problem. I will just let you go ahead and get started.
Okay, very good. Well, the first thing we'd like to do is make a few introductions. Those of you who are on the call are probably super familiar with myself. Again, Jessica Fry, GIS Project Manager with GeoCom, and I support the State of Iowa project. Blake, if you could go to the next slide. And then Melissa, I'm not sure who's all on from Comtech, but if you all would like to introduce yourselves.
Yep, I can go ahead. My name is Melissa Liebert. I am from Comtech Telecommunications, and I am the Program Manager for Location Services, which, as you'll learn in this presentation, is now including ALI. So I support ALI, I support GIS, I support our ECRF LVS solutions and everything NG location related. So I will be the point of contact on the Comtech side for this project.
Thank you, Melissa. Is anyone else from Comtech on?
Hi, Jessica. This is Bill Burnett. I'm with Comtech. I'm the Client Services Manager for the State of Iowa. I'm the main point of contact for all things State of Iowa and related to Comtech and ESINet in Iowa. And you may have heard my name, and if not, I hope to get to know you all and meet you at some point. Well, that was a lot. I'm not in Iowa, but hopefully with restrictions opening up, I'll be able to get back out there again soon.
Thank you, Bill. Is that all from Comtech? Okay, Blake, if you want to go to the next slide, please. What we want to spend most of the time this morning on is talking about the GIS Derived MSAG. So we want to define it, talk about the benefits of it, then transition into what are the GIS requirements. Then we're going to talk about the impacts to the current GIS QC checks and benchmarks. And this is in particular for the transition to NextGen 911 when we will be using the GIS data for call routing. We're going to talk about the critical error checks and then a little bit, just a brief discussion on the impacts of the GIS updates process. We're then going to talk about responsibilities, both from the local level all the way through the process. And then at the very end, we're going to spend a few moments talking about the PSAP Boundary Alignment Initiative and really kind of the kickoff to that kind of sub-project to the larger project. So next slide, please, Blake. For a GIS-derived MSAG, this goes by a variety of names. Sometimes it also goes by GIS-based MSAG, and there are some products out there that have specific names. But ultimately what this is it is a master street address guide MSAG derived from the GIS data. Now, typically this is the road center lines, but it is not always just the road center lines. It could also include address points. And this GIS-derived MSAG replaces the legacy MSAG. So instead of the GIS and the legacy MSAG being two different databases, it becomes one database managed through the GIS data. And really, this is the first step towards I3 GIS-based call routing. So this gets the state of Iowa even closer to implementation of the I3 call routing. Next slide, please, Blake. For benefits, really, there's two benefits here. The first is the centralized management of the MSAG. So again, all changes go through the GIS data, but it is co-managed by the PSAP through the MSAG coordinator that exists today and GIS. So while all of the changes will come through the GIS data, the MSAG coordinator is still vitally important because you will continue to get CRs, and somebody will need to take a look at what's going on there and then provide the necessary guidance to GIS. This also will provide for a smoother transition to I3 call routing. Next slide, please, Blake. So we have a couple of flow diagrams here. At the top, what you are seeing is the existing project. So how it works today. The PSAP GIS data is submitted through the GeoCom spatial interface. Those of you who submit GIS data, that is our GIS Data Hub product at GeoCom. From there, then your GIS data is quality controlled. You get the results back, and then you make the updates. So separate from that, there is the Comtech ALI DBMS. Now, I know that there are still other ALI providers in the state of Iowa as we transition, but for simplicity purposes, we're just going to talk on the Comtech side. So that is where your legacy MSAG exists, and it is maintained today by the MSAG coordinator. Now, we do know that some GIS people also serve as the MSAG coordinator, and that in many cases, the MSAG coordinator and GIS offices work very well together. So it could be the same person filling both of those roles, or that coordination could already occur. So that legacy MSAG lives within the Comtech system, and that is for subscriber record validations. So today the CRs are handled by the MSAG coordinator, where only the errors in the GIS data can potentially be identified via the synchronization in GIS Data Hub. So if there isn't a coordinated process between what it changes in the MSAG and potential changes in the GIS, those databases can be very different from one another, and the goal is to get them aligned for that easy transition to I3 call routing. So at the bottom is the future process, and this is where we're transitioning to. In this process, the PSAP's GIS data is again submitted through GIS Data Hub. That data from the road center lines and potentially the site structure address points is then converted to a GIS Derived MSAG, which is handed off to Comtech for adds, deletes, and changes within that MSAG that exists there today. So when the subscriber validation records are validated, then the CRs need to be co-handled by the MSAG coordinator and GIS. So really that means validation of all of those subscriber records are completed before it ever enters the MSAG, and those databases are no longer divergent, they are one and the same. Blake, next slide, please. So there are some requirements for the GIS data for this transition to GIS Derived MSAG. Basically, they are what exists in today's MSAG with just really kind of one exception or change. So low and high ranges need to be present and populated. Parity, which this is the one that's a bit different than what exists today. In today's MSAG, you have an odd even field where you can populate it with odd, even, or both. And the parity has the almost the identical information in there and will be used instead. You also need to have the legacy street name predirectional, street name type, and post-directional. So all of the different GIS fields that make up the legacy street name. You also will need to have the MSAG community and the state. Next slide, please, Blake. So what's the impact on the current QC checks and benchmarks? As we transition to this GIS Derived MSAG and then on to I3, we really need to look at what are the critical errors. So those are things that would cause calls not to be routed properly with the GIS data. And these are both internal to the individual data sets submitted and external, so how your jurisdiction aligns to other jurisdictions that surround you. This also means that your synchronization rate between your alley and road center line needs to be at or above 98%. Now, that 98% is not new to all of you. We have been striving for 98% alley to road centerline synchronization for, I think, probably about 2 years, if not longer. We do know, based on the recent cutovers to the ComTech alley, that those synchronization rates often have taken a dip. GIS maintenance providers are now working on bringing that back up to 98%. And in all honesty, the major reason why is because of the reduced number of records within the ComTech alley. And so it's not that something happened to the data on either side. It's just when you have less alley records to synchronize to the road center lines, that means more errors need to be corrected in order to meet that 98%. Next slide, please, Blake. So now I want to take a few minutes to talk about the internal critical quality control checks. So these are the things that in each entity submission to GIS Data Hub, we will check for, and they are critical. One thing I will mention now is that I have provided Blake with a spreadsheet of each of the quality control checks that are completed. And, oh, there we go. Thank you, Blake. And in this PDF document, there is a field that indicates if it is critical, and if it is critical, it is gray in color. Not only that, but I've included the quality control checks code, which is the layer name that you will receive back if there are errors in that for that check, and what you will find in the QC Fallout CSV file. I also added the applicable layers and also applicable fields where it was appropriate. The other fields that are in there, the QC check name, the description, the exception code, those are all the same. They were present in other documents that we've distributed. Blake, if you could just, I think it's maybe the second page, if you could go maybe to the second page so I could show where the second or third page, the fields. Maybe the next one. It's the general checks where we look at what are the values that where there's a mandatory field. Oh, that's interesting. It should have been before that. Oh, there we go, right there. Okay, so here is the example or the page that has the applicable fields. So for example, with the road center line no value, we're really looking at just the mandatory fields, but I have listed them out for you so you know specifically which fields they are. So that includes discrepancy agency ID. We typically call it source of data, date update, from to address left and right, country left and right, state left and right, county left and right, incorporated municipality left and right, street name, parity left and right, ESN left and right for, I believe we have it turned on now for every jurisdiction, and then the MSAG community left and right. ESN isn't as vitally as important as the MSAG community, but where it is present, we are checking that. So that gives you a good idea. Blake will distribute this out after the call with all of the rest of the details and information there. If you have any questions or you find something that doesn't quite look right in this document, if you would just please let me know, and I would be happy to take a look and make any updates and get it redistributed. But I think for the most part, all of the checks are there. They're all marked if they're critical or not critical, with all of the details that you should need in order to know exactly what we're looking for. So Blake, if you could go back to the presentation. So you kind of saw a sneak peek of these when we were going through the spreadsheet, but we will be looking for unique identifiers in each of the data layers. We will also be looking at features with no value. Again, those are mandatory fields. We will also be looking for multi-part geometry for the road center lines. And Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, are we also looking for polygons? I think I might have forgotten to update that.
Yeah, but I have a feeling it might be on the next slide.
Oh, okay. I wasn't looking ahead, but if it's not, we are checking for boundaries, correct?
Maybe not. So yes, we are also looking for boundaries.
Okay, very good. I apologize for not making that update. I missed that one. Blake, if you could go back to the next slide, or the last slide. Also values outside of domain in the mandatory fields. And here we're just looking for all of those fields that have a list of acceptable values. And if it is something different, then it will come back as an error. I'll be honest, most of these are all just typos that have accidentally occurred, and they're super easy to fix and get resubmitted. We will also be looking for polygon overlaps, ensuring that the boundaries, fire law, EMS, PSAP, are covering the provisioning boundary and also not overhanging the provisioning boundary. So your provisioning boundary is what tells the system that you are responsible for providing that data. And so you can't provide data outside of it, and you need to provide data for that entire area. We'll also be looking to see that the address points and road center lines do not go outside of the provisioning boundary, so they stay in. There are some cases where we've worked through with the local jurisdictions on how to handle some certain things. So if you have any features that are outside your provisioning boundary, if you will let me know, we will work through those to get everything aligned how it should be. Next slide, please, Blake. So just 3 more critical errors for internal to the jurisdiction. Range overlaps. Also, we will look for null range values, which I just took a look this morning and I could not find any jurisdiction who had submitted that has null ranges in their values. So I think we are good there. And then also address found multiple times. So this is the SSAP duplicates check, where it identifies address points that have the exact same address. Everything is the same. There's no sub-addressing information, or the sub-addressing information is duplicate. So this is truly duplicate addresses that we're checking for, and not stacked address points. Next slide, please, Blake. So now I want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about what are we concerned about for the external critical quality control checks. So how your data aligns with other jurisdictions. This is really limited to just a handful of checks. The globally unique ID, and what this means is that the unique ID in any one feature is not used anywhere else in the data submitted for the state of Iowa. If you remember the way that unique identifiers are created, or how we've recommended them be created, they will have a abbreviation of a layer that leads them, and at the end they will have the discrepancy agency ID or the source of data. You can find any of these critical error checks in the statewide quality control that is available on the landing page that we've put out there. If you do not know what that is, Blake, I will send you that link so that you can send it out with all of the rest of the details. I should have put it in the presentation and I didn't. But at any time you can go and download the statewide data set. Of course, it's stored in GIS Data Hub, so you have to log in to access that. And also it has the QC checks right within that download. So it's available at any time for you to download and take a look at. We'll also be looking at polygon overlaps for other jurisdictions and polygon gaps with other jurisdictions. When we're looking at overlaps and gaps, it is important to know that there is a buffer. So it doesn't have to be absolutely 100% vertice to vertice alignment with your neighbors. There is an 8 square foot tolerance built in there. And so where you would typically see a lot of gaps and overlaps, you're not going to see a tremendous number, and most of them are pretty significant. So if you have a chance, I would recommend a GIS person download that and take a look and see how your data aligns to those other jurisdictions. And if you have any questions or concerns, just feel free to reach out to me. Next slide, please, Blake. Okay, so the impact on the GIS update process, specifically at this point in time for the GIS Derived MSAG component, is that the road center lines, when changes are made, are submitted to GIS Data Hub within 72 hours. Now, we're not talking 72 hours. Let's say you get it on a Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. Do you have to have it done 72 hours later? This 72 hours really is more of a 3 business day. So if it comes in on a Friday, then of course you have until Tuesday in order to get those changes made. But just keep in mind that, like any other CR that hangs out there in the ALI system today, as soon as you can get it updated, the better it is. And then the phone companies will not be hounding you or even contact to make those changes. So it really is the same process that is used today, but it's a bit different since it does come from the GIS data. Okay, Blake, I think the next slide is going into timeline. Let's cover that and then we'll break and see if there's any questions. So what's the timeline for this? Well, our ultimate goal is that all of the counties are critical error free and at 98% alley to road centerline synchronization by September. I keep an eye on submissions that are sent in almost on a daily basis. Sometimes it's every other day when I have other things that are going on, but I'm always looking at those and seeing how they are. I did take a look recently at the critical errors, and most of those are really kind of what we call low-hanging fruit, things that could easily be corrected, updated, and resubmitted. And 98% alley to road centerline synchronization, we only have a handful of counties who have not gotten to that yet. Of course, that has been a benchmark for several other halves. And those who have not met the benchmark primarily are working on getting them to that 98%. So do I believe we can get there? Yeah, absolutely, we can get there, but it is going to take some work, and we're really going to have to work together on that. So for the implementation of the GIS Derived MSAG, we are really looking at fall, winter. So the goal of September is to be able to start that implementation in late fall and winter so that we can get to that end goal of having that GIS Derived MSAG. So September 2021, error-free, 98% alley to road centerline, and then GIS Derived MSAG shortly after that in late fall or winter. So with that, Blake, I think let's take a pause and see if anybody has any questions.
And maybe the best way to do this is there's a raise your hand feature within Google Meet, or type it into the chat, and we'll try to keep this a little bit organized so people aren't talking over each other if there are any questions.
I'm not. Oh, Jamie, I see, has a raised hand.
Yeah, the turnaround time, I think, is going to be a little bit of an issue, and I guess I don't know how it is at other places. It's kind of a single point of success or failure here, and if I go on vacation for 5 days, is there going to be someone there to do those change requests? No. I mean, that's kind of the simple answer. We've got kind of a new arrangement with our PSAP and our 911 people, where we've got a little committee that's going to look at these change requests. We're all on the emails, but I'm essentially managing the interface now. And I guess, can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, the expectation has never really been on the GIS people, and now it's shifting to GIS people. And I feel like, we are kind of being, made responsible for this, and we don't really have the people to do that in a kind of a backup situation. So just thoughts on that.
Blake, do you want to take that, or Melissa?
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one.
Yep, and just so everyone knows kind of the process that we went through, prior to this, a couple weeks ago, we kind of picked out a few of the GIS folks throughout the state that we're used to talking to when we roll things out like this, and this question came up there as well. There is no hard and fast rule. There is no punitive issue if you can't make that 72 hours or 3 business days. It's really a best practice. In order to make sure changes are made in a timely fashion. It's not like, you're going to lose funding or get a nasty email or anything like that. It really is just a best practice for kind of going forward with this style or method of data.
Perfect. That answers my question 100%.
Awesome. Thanks.
This is Aaron, kind of piggyback on that, because we have a similar issue. We're collating 13 jurisdictions data, QCing it, each one manages their own, and 72 hours is just literally impossible for us, frankly. And I kind of wonder if we need to have a discussion about a different way to get those in, because I do see that it's critical that the MSAG is updated as soon as possible. And I know we mentioned it last time, is there a back door to push in one record to fix it, and then when the GIS data catches up, it will eventually put that in. We have a system in place in our group to find these issues and flag them for the person to fix. That doesn't mean it's going to be done in 72 hours. So I think we need to talk about that further and find alternative ways to kind of get those records in so that public safety isn't impacted and the GIS can still have its time to do its process in QC and get it in, if that makes sense. Silence is not good.
This is Melissa from Comtech. I can speak a little bit to that. I know after our last meeting, I kind of brought this topic up internally, and because the system essentially updates every day, it's going to be the process. We would have to force push the changes in every day, which is why we're looking at the GIS solution, with the understanding that it might take longer to get the changes in because of the GIS processes, and to Blake's point, that's why there is some flexibility, but since there are people behind those alley records that aren't being able to validate, that's why we're asking for 3 business days. But like, we can definitely continue talking about this on the side, to just figure out the best way for everyone.
Yep, sounds good.
Blake, there is a question from Brenda in the chat, and I have no answer for that. Maybe it's something Melissa can answer. Melissa, are you able to see the chat?
Oh, Brenda's, not Scott. I was like, I think Scott's question is
Brenda.
for you.
Nope, Brenda. It came in first.
Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. So that is a really excellent point. So this 3 business days is some.
Hey, Melissa, just for those not in the chat, maybe you could read the question and then address it. Just
Yeah. So Brenda's question is there a good way to address phone service providers that do not respond to a TNCR? Yes. Well, half yes. So I'll go back a little bit. So the 3 business days is not to resolve it, because Comtech and the state definitely understand that sometimes the service provider will submit a bad address, or they will submit an address that has a incorrect MSAG community, or isn't even in your jurisdiction, or they didn't get approval from the addressing authority, and so it is outside of your GIS road range. There's a list of reasons why what the service provider sends you all is just plain wrong, and you need to send it back. So not all issues are going to be resolved with changing your GIS data. Some of them will be quote unquote resolved or addressed by submitting a ALI DR through the website, and that will kick the record back to the carrier saying, hey, this is wrong for this, that, or the other reason, or you haven't done your due diligence and you need to contact the addressing authority for that county or that PSAP area. So the if they are truly not responding, I think they can get escalated like to your office, and you can assist in pressuring those with some assistance from ComTech as well.
Yep, I would agree.
Yeah, and then Scott asked the question, for those of us who contract with GeoCom for GIS maintenance for the 911 system, will GeoCom be taking care of this part of that? So yes, if you have GIS maintenance with GeoCom, we will update the road center lines. However, we have a couple of different ways that we do maintenance projects. For those that include MSAG maintenance, we will take the responsibility on from start to finish and then reach out to you if there are any questions. For those that don't have GIS or MSAG maintenance, MSAG maintenance, you will still remain the MSAG coordinator, and we will need to work closely with you to make sure that the changes are appropriate and that those are made correctly. So it really will depend. Most of the Iowa counties do have MSAG maintenance with us now, and so it'll just kind of be the one-stop shop at GeoCom for those. If you have any questions specifically, feel free to reach out to me and I can answer more specifics on that. And then Brenda had in the chat, I end up having to resubmit the request and that takes more time. Yeah, it's not always timely on the telephone provider side, unfortunately.
Yep, and again, for those records that you're having to resubmit, you definitely get Blake involved in that, saying that this carrier is just not responding, and again, it will, if the concern is also driven by that 3 business days, it won't impact that because you have addressed it.
Blake, I don't see any more questions in the chat and I don't see any raised hands.
Nope, I would agree. If there's any other questions and you've just been waiting to hold on to them, now would be a good time. Otherwise, we'll move on with the next part.
Jessica, can I bring up one thing that I know wasn't on the slides but might be important to the users?
Absolutely.
So for the validation process, sorry we didn't have a slide on this because it is a pretty important aspect. So it's going to be a hierarchical validation process. So the system is going to look at your address points first to see if the ALI record can validate just on an address point. And if it finds an address point for validation, it stops there. It doesn't actually go and look at your road center line for validation. It only goes to your road center line data if it can't find a site address point that matches that ALI. So the positive thing there is it's a good incentive to build out a comprehensive address point layer, just so oftentimes those are cleaner, I'm going to say, and they take into account a lot of odd addressing standards or no standards, mixed parity areas, or an address point that has a different street name than the actual street that it's next to, due to the history of that address. And so I just wanted to point out that if there's any concerns with your data, especially that last example I gave, if it's the address is 123 Main Street because that's what the street used to be called, The street has since been changed to Front Street, but that address, for one reason or another, outside, again, your control, refused to change their main street to Front Street. If the alley record is Main Street, it will validate and it won't fail because the road is different. So sorry if that's a little confusing just to speak through rather than visually see. I just wanted to make the point that your address points definitely rule as the primary validation point, and then the road center line is that fallback.
Melissa, can I ask a quick follow-up on that? Is that also true with units and like room numbers for address points?
Units and yeah. So are you saying if like for
Well, if you
Go ahead.
do an address point that is specific to a unit, unit 5, 123 Main Street, unit 5, but you don't have an address point for all the units in a hotel or whatever,
Yeah.
does it still hit the main address point?
Yes.
Okay.
Regardless of the sub-address information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And
So-
Lawrence has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Lawrence, you can go ahead if you'd like. Perhaps Lawrence is on mute and can't come off. Aaron, you also have your hand up, so if you're able to come off of mute, you can feel free to ask.
Sure, just a quick follow-up on that one then. When we're doing our 98% accuracy check, I think one of the checks is that every address point does match with a center line with the correct 100 block and street name. So in your scenario you gave, there would no longer be a center line technically with that street name. But we're going to get errors on those in our geocom checks. Excuse me. So is that still going to be an error check that's valid, or do we need to remove that?
So specifically with the address point to road center line, it is not a critical error, so it won't cause any problems in the system. Also, that check in our current system is everything as a part of that address point to road center line. We have made the request in the future to be able to say, no, don't check this or don't check this, right? Any of the sub things, and keep kind of like the no matching street name found. I know that found multiple times on the alley to site structure address point is also an issue that many people have a hard time with. We can't turn any of the sub checks off at this point, but again, we've made that request, and so in the future, hopefully we can. But at this point in time, it will remain there. It's just not a critical error, so you can ignore those errors altogether.
Jessica, is there a geocom exception code associated with that check?
Yeah, there is an exception code for site structure address point to road center line, and it's in that spreadsheet that Blake will send out. I believe it's 401, but I could be incorrect.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And Lawrence doesn't have his hand up anymore, so very good. Thank you, Melissa.
Yep.
And we can get some documentation out on that to everybody too. So, okay, so responsibilities. For the PSAP, and I just found a typo, what you will need to do is continue to provide copies of your Comtech Alley and MSAG to the GIS data provider on a regular basis. Now, if your GIS person has access to the Comtech Alley, great, they can pull those as they need. And I know many local GIS data maintenance providers do have access to that. If your GIS data provider does not have access to it, though, you do need to make sure that you provide that. We are recommending that that is at least monthly. I know just on the last couple of counties that have been processed, I noted a huge number of additional alley records from last time they submitted to this time. So I do know that those are changing in count on a pretty frequent basis. So again, we recommend at least monthly or at least every time the data is submitted to GIS Data Hub. The PSAP will also need to coordinate with their GIS data provider on all of the CRs. That will ensure that the GIS data maintains alignment prior to transition. And then the final one is just in conjunction with your GIS data provider, make those necessary GIS updates to resolve the alley to road center line errors. So those GIS data providers who are working to get to 98%, I just know based on the sheer number of counties that I have assisted over the last even 3 months, many of those changes are needed to happen in the current MSAG, thus the alley, and they really need your help to make sure that those are done. So if you haven't talked to your GIS data provider about how you can help with those, please reach out to them and just let them know that you're there to help. Next slide, please, Blake. For the GIS data providers, your responsibilities really are to correct all of the critical errors as identified by the quality control results that you receive. Of course, local submissions are of the utmost importance. Remember, this is after this half, so we still need to get through June. If you've not met the benchmarks, please make sure that you meet the benchmarks for this half. If you've met the benchmarks, then work on the critical errors and get all of that good to go. And then you also want to look at those statewide identified gaps and overlaps. You will also want to make sure you correct all of the alley to road center line errors as needed. One of the important things to remember is that while we do a 98% synchronization rate, that is the benchmark, 98% for a jurisdiction or a county with a population of 1,500 is a handful of records. 98% for a county that has hundreds of thousands of alley records is thousands of alley addresses that do not match the road center line. Again, as Melissa mentioned, the address points will be used first and the road center line second. So for all of those that are falling out in the road center lines, if you make sure that those are in the address points, you should be good to go. You will need to coordinate with the PSAP MSAG community coordinator, good Lord, to identify and update any legacy MSAG records today, right? Those that are kind of hanging out there that need to be corrected in order for you to meet the benchmarks. And then again, submit the GIS data, alley, and MSAG as needed to GIS Data Hub. We have the 72 hours, 3 business days here, but we'll again take that back and talk about it a little bit more. I think for most jurisdictions that don't have a lot of wireline phones going in, that 72 hours will probably be very doable because you just don't have very many CRs in a day or a week or a month even. It will be those larger population areas that will probably have more of those that occur. We'll talk about that, and Blake will get back with you for some more information. Blake, before you go to the next slide, I would like to say one thing about submission of alley and MSAGs. So the alley and MSAG from ComTech, we have provided instructions on how to export that. The process to get to GIS Data Hub has become a lot smoother just in the last, 6-7 months. That process seems to be going very well, but we are still seeing several submissions of the alley with those field names that have special characters or start with a number. So if you do not have the instructions that we provided on how to export that directly from the ComTech system in the format needed with all of the information on the slight changes that need to be made before submitting, please let me know. I'd be happy to send that out. I believe Blake sent it out in months past along with the monthly report. But just keep in mind, like any other GIS process, your fields can't start with a number and can't have special character. So that seems to be the most errors that we are receiving lately on those. And Blake, I see Iowa County 911 has their hand raised. I don't know. Are you able to come off of mute?
This is Josh with Iowa County. So we have a couple questions. We're seeing some errors between, and we used to manage our own before this all happened when we migrated. So maybe something that we need to address a different way. But so we're seeing some MSAG ranges in the ComTech database that don't match what they should be on our side. And then we also have had some errors that have come up, and we have fixed them and then been told that it overlaps something else, but not with what it overlaps. And I'm thinking that if it overlaps an MSAG that's wrong on the ComTech side that doesn't match ours, that's why. But how do we correct that if we're not able to modify things on that database, the part of that stuff on that database?
Just a clarification, what do you mean by you're not able to modify it? Are you not do you not have a user account for the AliDBMS?
Yes, we do. But we've changed something, like the MSAG community was wrong. We changed the MSAG community. We got a response that it's not going to be changed because it overlaps something else. But that MSAG range is completely wrong. If we change it on what we believe it is, it's going to throw off the entire ComTech database then, because you're rounding to the nearest. Our ranges, for instance, I'll just use one here, like 3291 to 3299, and you have 3291 to 3300, which is a new block. So that's wrong. Like, that's not how it should have been. So I'm not sure how we fix that. And that might be a discussion that we need to have offline, but I was just wondering about like how that's going to play into all this with all these other counties, since, you know, obviously we managed our own before. So I'm just, I guess that's a concern that I have. And, you know, that's obviously a critical error. So.
Right. So I'm putting my email in the chat box, and we'll definitely have a meeting offline. If I'm following you right, it's just a matter of submitting a change to shrink one range so you can add in another range, essentially. But I kind of want to look over your shoulder with a screen share to see what you're seeing before I make that the official fix for the issue.
Okay. Yeah, and that's just affecting the MSAG ranges, so that's why I asked it. So I appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay, Blake, if you could go to the next slide, talk a little bit about Iowa HSEMD's responsibilities, provide the support as needed to the PFAP and GIS data providers, and then coordinate the Next-Gen 911 effort with all of the partners, as Blake and the team have done for many years. Next slide, please, Blake. So for GeoCom, our responsibilities are to continue to provide the GIS Data Hub quality control checks results as the data is submitted by the jurisdictions. One thing I also might mention on GIS Data Hub, if you submit and you don't get any results within 24 hours, if you would please reach out to the team. We have had a couple recently that have been submitted, but there's no changes. So it's kind of important that if you don't receive results and you're expecting results, that you reach out to us, because sometimes something just isn't right with either the submission or something has happened. So please let us know. Don't be afraid to reach out to us. We would be happy to look at anything that you have concerns over. We will be merging, or we already do merge all of the submitting jurisdictions into the statewide geodatabase and complete the quality control checks on those. We also will provide the GIS data to ComTech for the GIS Derived MSAG. Again, Melissa mentioned that will be a daily process. And really what that means is if you submit today, then your data will be provisioned to ComTech. If you submit tomorrow, then it will be the next day. So we're not going to hold 5 days worth of counties before sending it to ComTech. We will also provide the ComTech error reports to the jurisdictions as needed. Now that's just on the GIS side. If there's something that's critical when they take a look at the GIS data that needs to be taken care of, that does not include the existing CR process. We will provide support to the GIS data providers on identifying methods to resolve errors. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us on any errors that you might have. We sometimes you all find some tricky things that are a little bit different that does take a little bit of looking at and investigating and providing guidance to determine how to make those corrections. And we will also provide support to Iowa HSMD to facilitate the boundary gaps and overlap errors between submitting jurisdictions as they relate to the PSAPs, which are PSAP boundary, which we're going to talk more about in a few moments. I did see something come up in chat, Blake. So Ray said the ALI MSAG data available for download from ComTech is typically in fixed width format. However, is there any chance that the download format can be set to include column width information? It's a minor thing, but I think that would improve data transfer. Actually, Ray, the instructions that we have and have sent out export the data in a CSV format. So it's all in the format that it needs, with the exception of making the changes to those field names. And actually, I believe you just removed those fields for GIS synchronization. Melissa, is that's correct, right? I'm pretty sure it's CSV that we download.
Yeah, that's the format that GeoCom accepts. It doesn't accept that text format. That's also an option. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what Ray is saying is when it's in a text format, then you have to import it and know the fixed width. Is that a relatively recent change? No, Ray, I can't remember how long ago we sent those instructions out, but I will make a note to get you those instructions sent so that you can export directly as a CSV. And Blake, I will include you on that email, so just in case anybody else is interested in those, you can distribute along with the rest of the information from today's call.
Sounds good.
Okay, making myself a note so I don't forget. Okay, Blake, you could go to the next slide. So ComTech, they will be responsible for providing the error reports to GeoCom on the GIS Derived MSAG. And of course, they are the owners of the ComTech ALI DBMS. And so anything that's related to that, they are responsible for. You know, we do have the ability to provide a little bit of guidance based on our experience, but if it's anything in particular with ALI and how that works, please refer all of those questions on to ComTech. Next slide, please, Blake. Okay, so I want to just take a couple of minutes here at the end of the call to talk about the PSAP Boundary Alignment Initiative. So over the last 5+ years that I've worked with the state of Iowa, we do know that there are some areas based on some legacy things like exchange boundaries and other topics where the PSAP boundaries are slightly different between neighboring jurisdictions. So we've identified those jurisdictions, and we will, I guess, myself and the mouse in my pocket will be setting up some cross-jurisdictional meetings to really talk about those areas with those large overlaps and gaps among the PSAP boundaries. And our goal here is to have a seamless PSAP boundary that can be used for a variety of things that are occurring in Iowa, not only for ComTech, but also for, I believe, wireless call routing it's used for today, Rapid SOS. There's just a variety of things that need that PSAP boundary. One of the things I did not put on the slide is we are going to be implementing a new web-based tool for Iowa called GeoComm Contributor. And what GeoComm Contributor does is it allows jurisdictions to go in, particularly those that don't have a local GIS person, to really mark up those PSAP boundaries so that when we're in these meetings and moving forward, we can all look at the same map and interface on those PSAP boundaries and get the approval that we need from all parties. So that is coming. We're really talking about starting this either yet late this month or early next month. I'd really like to get contributors set up before we have those cross-jurisdictional meetings, but I don't have a timeline on that yet. And so with that being said, even if I don't have that set up or the team doesn't have that set up by early June, I will be reaching out to you to talk about when we can bring all of those jurisdictions together to talk about those PSAP boundaries. With that being said, I think, Blake, that was my last slide. So we have about 5 minutes. If anybody has any additional questions, or if you're one of those PSAPs that know that you have some boundaries that you need to look at and you want to volunteer, feel free to write it in the chat, send me an email, raise your hand, whatever the case might be. And Blake, you wanted to talk about the grant funding for
yes. Just wrap this up and see if there's any questions afterwards. But we are ready to announce the grant for next fiscal year, and it really shouldn't come as any surprise. It's literally everything that we've talked about. So the program itself is still structured the same way. Upload the data twice, once in each 6-month period of the year. You would, once you meet the benchmarks, you receive half of the grant, which is $6,000 per PSAP. The criteria, again, is really in alignment with what we've talked about here. 98% GIS accuracy, 98% alley to road center line, and then finally the 0 critical errors. And this is something that I have been socializing for a number of months. Talked about it at 911 council meetings and really haven't gotten much of any feedback. So again, it's all in alignment with what you've heard today and where we need to be. So I think with that, we would be ready for any questions.
Jamie has his hand raised.
Yeah, and the first of those would take place when, like, just ballpark. For the first, like, from July on, would that be the first portion of this new
Correct.
definition? Okay.
Yep. So the first period is basically July 1st through December 31st. And,
yes.
and I will add really quick on the benchmarks. You guys have all done a really great job with that over the last 3 years. You know, as we've continued to stair step those accuracy rates, we've actually increased the number of counties receiving the grant. So as we've raised the standards, more counties have actually qualified. So again, kudos to everyone and thank you for your cooperation on that effort.
Yeah, and Blake Thomas asked a question in the chat. Just to clarify, GeoComm will be working to solve those critical errors for counties with GeoComm GIS contracts. Yes, that is correct, Thomas. I don't see any other questions in the chat or hands raised. Again, you feel free to email me if you have any questions. If there is anything that comes up with GIS Data Hub, feel free to reach out to myself or the Iowa team. We can assist you in all of those. Yeah, Brenda said sometimes the error correction is a little like whack-a-mole. We fix one and create several more errors. Yes, that can happen. Specifically when you're looking at ranges and you're making changes to the road ranges. Sometimes they don't all get updated in that linear line for the roads, and more come up. And yes, we experience that too on a nearly daily basis. If anything comes up in particular that really throws things out of whack, just reach out to me and I'd be happy to help, as would the Iowa team.
Yep. And I would just say that I will send out the slides, the recording of this webinar, the documents that were talked about. And then if there are any offline questions, you can get in touch with any of the 3 of the contacts listed there. So I appreciate everyone's attendance and hope you have a good rest of the day. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep, that's fine. What? Not the big. All right, thank you.
Hey, Blair.
Hey, we don't.
How's it going?
The light one. How big your office is?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I'm still working on cleaning them all out.
Maybe you have a window.
Pretty fancy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, technically you have a closet.
Right.
Then I go hide in and cry.
All right.
See you later.
We're around 3 or 4 now.
Right.
Well, you charge for possession without.
Yeah, no, the one we were using before we got the state one. Hold on, yeah, let me put that down, hold on, let me get speakers. Yeah, because he can use, well, he can use the TS channel too. Yeah, the NPS call E, is that what you're talking about? It's under jail. 17 NPS call E.
The quality of the burner, where are the
Awesome, okay, sounds good. No, I'm gonna call him right now. All right, talk to you later. Okay.
I don't know, do they? But then they sell the SD cards, the, like, triple the cost.
Okay.
Well, this will turn on. Wow.
You can have, don't have, I'm not gonna do that.
Dang
it. Okay. Not later.
Which means I can.
Oh, it works with them. This is part of the one has terminal. Good number 4, so it looks like you're on par. was awesome.